What if the future of a billion-dollar company rested not on lawyers or boardrooms, but on the fragile hands of a 9-year-old girl scribbling on a diner napkin? If stories of unexpected heroes and healing families touch your heart, please consider subscribing so you can stay with us until the very last chapter. The Union Square diner hummed with the rhythm of New York City itself. Outside, the evening sky had turned steel gray, and the snow that had begun to fall melted instantly on the pavement, only to turn slick and dangerous underfoot. Taxi horns blared in impatient bursts, while inside the diner, the clatter of plates and the hiss of the coffee machine filled the narrow space with warmth. In the far corner, beneath a neon clock that ticked with an almost stubborn determination, sat a girl who seemed both out of place and perfectly at home. Hannah Parker was only 9, but her small shoulders already carried a weight most adults would falter beneath. She bent over a math worksheet, her pencil tapping a rhythm as if urging her brain to move faster. Beside the math book lay a stack of worn paperbacks, their spines cracked from constant use. French dictionaries, beginner's guides to Spanish, even a children's Japanese grammar primer she had borrowed so many times from the Brooklyn Public Library that the librarian simply let her keep it. Her mother worked the evening shift at the diner, apron tied snug around her waist, moving briskly between tables with a smile that hid fatigue. To most customers, Hannah was invisible, just the waitress's kid killing time until closing. But tonight, a man in an immaculate charcoal suit, with the distant eyes of someone burdened by more than one sleepless night, noticed her. Kenjiro Sato, CEO of Sato Global Shipping, had not planned to step into this diner. His world revolved around glass towers in Midtown, contracts worth millions, and boardrooms where reputations lived or died. But the storm had delayed his driver, and exhaustion had driven him into the warmth of the nearest open door. He carried his laptop, shoulders heavy with the pressure of an international contract teetering on collapse. He slid into a booth, ordered tea without looking up, and opened his computer. Rows of text filled the screen, clauses, numbers, and legal jargon in French, German, and Italian. His legal team in Tokyo had warned him, one mistranslated phrase could cost the company $5 million. And yet, after 3 days of round-the-clock negotiations, the French addendum still mocked him. Hannah glanced up from her worksheet. Her eyes, a dark brown that absorbed light rather than reflected it, lingered on the scrolling document across the aisle. The words glowed in French, and though she had only studied from battered books and online scraps, her brain began unconsciously stitching meaning. Kenjiro muttered under his breath, switching tabs, highlighting a paragraph. His frustration was palpable, his hand running down his tie as though loosening it might loosen the knot in his chest. The little girl tilted her head, then quietly slid from her chair, clutching her pencil. With the shy courage of a child who has learned that waiting is worse than trying, she approached. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, her accent pure New York. "That line, it doesn't mean gross volume storage. It's closer to dead storage. It changes the liability." Kenjiro's head snapped up, startled. His eyes, sharp as flint, found the small figure standing beside his booth. A diner waitress's daughter, 9 years old at most. He blinked, then frowned. "You can read this?" Hannah nodded, clutching the pencil like a shield. "A little. I practice." She pointed at the clause on his screen. "If you sign it as is, they'll charge you for space you don't use. My teacher says French likes to hide tricks inside simple words." The CEO stared at her, torn between disbelief and a strange flicker of hope. "And you are?" "Hannah," she said. "Hannah Parker. My mom works here." Before he could reply, her mother called from across the diner, balancing a tray of burgers. "Hannah, let the man eat. I told you." Her voice softened when she noticed the man's gaze. But Kenjiro wasn't annoyed. He was astonished. He gestured to the empty seat opposite him. "Sit," he said simply. "Show me what you see." Hana hesitated, then slid into the booth. She pulled a napkin from the holder, spread it carefully, and began to scribble with her pencil. Words formed, arrows drawn, translations offered in her uneven handwriting. She flipped between French and English, sometimes faltering, sometimes whispering to herself. But the corrections she made, line after line, were not guesses. They were precise, logical, and devastatingly accurate. Kenjiro leaned forward, watching her small hands race across the napkin as though they carried a lifetime of urgency. The diner around them faded. The clink of silverware, the muttered conversations, the hiss of the coffee machine. It was only this girl, this unlikely savior, pulling threads of meaning from foreign words like a weaver at her loom. When she finally looked up, cheeks flushed with effort, she slid the napkin toward him. "It should say this," she murmured. Kenjiro read the crude translation. His heart pounded. She was right. A trap clause no one in his team of Harvard-educated lawyers had caught by a 9-year-old in a diner. He exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in days. "Do you understand what you just did?" he asked. Hana blinked, uncertain. "I just don't like when words lie." Kenjiro's throat tightened. For years he had hidden behind walls of money, contracts, and strategy, believing only seasoned professionals could save empires. Yet here was a child, invisible to the world, who had just shifted the fate of his company with nothing but honesty and curiosity. "Thank you, Hana," he said quietly, bowing his head with the old reflex of his culture. "Arigato." She tilted her head, recognizing the word from her Japanese primer. A smile tugged at her lips. "You're welcome, Mr. Sato," he answered. "Kenjiro Sato." The diner door swung open, letting in a gust of icy wind, but neither noticed. In that moment, a fragile bridge formed between two worlds, the skyscrapers of Midtown and the crumbling stairwells of Brooklyn, a man with the power to command fleets and a little girl who carried her family's survival in her school bag. Hana picked up her pencil, almost shy again. "If you have more papers, I can try. Just don't tell my mom I was nosy." Kenjiro allowed himself the faintest smile. "Perhaps, Hana, the world has been waiting for you to be nosy." Snow pressed harder against the windows of the Union Square diner that evening, coating the sidewalks in a thin layer of white. The neon signs flickered, and fewer customers came in, mostly hurried workers seeking warmth before braving the storm again. Inside, the atmosphere shifted into something quieter, more intimate. Hana sat at the same small corner table, the light above her flickering now and then, as if conspiring with the night to make her invisible. In front of her lay her homework and, stacked beneath it, the forbidden treasure. Battered foreign language books she had borrowed too many times to count. She touched them like relics. Each book carried the smell of dust and ink, proof that she had wandered beyond Brooklyn's limits without ever leaving her seat. Kenjiro Sato returned, laptop under his arm. Something about last night's encounter had unsettled him, in the most surprising way. He had not slept easily, replaying the moment a 9-year-old had spotted what his highly paid legal team had missed. This morning, his lawyers had confirmed Hana was correct. That single clause, corrected in time, had spared the company from a multi-million-dollar trap. So he came back. Not for the tea, not for the food, but for the girl. He slid into the same booth, opening his laptop once more. When he lifted his eyes, he found Hana watching curiously, her pencil still moving across math problems though her attention was elsewhere. "You came back," she said softly, almost surprised. "Yes," he admitted, "and I brought more papers." Her eyes widened slightly. Then, before her courage could retreat, she scooped up her books and moved to his booth. The waitress, her mother, shot her a questioning glance from across the room, but when she saw that it was the same man as before, she only sighed and carried on with her tray. Kenjiro pulled up the next set of documents. This time, the addendums were not in French, but in German and Spanish, with an Italian clause thrown in for complexity. "These are supplements to the contract," he explained, though he suspected she already knew more than she let on. Hana leaned closer, her small hands steady, her eyes darting across the screen. German compound words loomed like walls, but she had studied enough to see through their structure. She pointed quickly. "Here. Nettolagerraum." They translated it as gross volume storage, but it's not. It's net storage space. That means they're charging you for air. Kenjiro blinked. "Charging for air?" "Yes," Hana said firmly, scribbling the word on a napkin. "For space you don't fill. Like if someone makes you pay for an empty glass instead of just the water." The metaphor landed. Kenjiro's lips curved despite himself. She had not just translated a technical phrase, she had explained it with the clarity of a teacher who understood her students' confusion. She moved to the Spanish page next, lips moving soundlessly as she read. "Here, almacenamiento muerto." That means dead storage, not inactive space. If you sign it as written, they'll keep goods longer than they should and make you responsible for delays. Her small pencil scribbled on the napkin again, arrows linking words, tiny stars next to clauses. Kenjiro could almost see her mind whirring like a finely tuned engine. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. Hana shrugged, embarrassed. "From books, from listening, sometimes from YouTube videos at the library. Languages feel like puzzles. And puzzles don't care if you're rich or poor. They just want to be solved." Kenjiro studied her. Her face glowed with intensity, not the weariness of a child dragged into adulthood, but the fire of someone whose spirit refused to be dimmed. Then came the test. Kenjiro flipped to an Italian clause notorious for confusing even seasoned translators. Hana scanned it, mouthing syllables under her breath. No, it's not temporary custodial fees. It's closer to contingency custody. That's important. One means they can charge you every month. The other means only when there's an accident." Kenjiro stared. His lawyers had debated that line for hours, and this child had sliced through the confusion in minutes. She flipped the page again. Suddenly, katakana letters filled the screen, Japanese, the very language of Kenjiro's birth. Hana squinted, tracing the characters with her finger. "This one I don't know well, but—" She leaned closer, sounding out each symbol. "It says kaiko. Dismissal, not termination of goods. This isn't about cargo. It's about people." Kenjiro's chest tightened. She was right again. Even without fluency, she had sensed the trap. A word intentionally left vague to imply goods when it was meant to apply to contracts with dock workers. The diner around them faded. Hana was no longer a little girl sitting across from him. She was a translator, a problem solver, a mind capable of bridging oceans. Finally, she looked up at him, cheeks flushed, eyes uncertain. "Did I get it wrong?" "No," Kenjiro said quietly, voice thick with awe. "You got it right. More right than anyone else." For the first time in years, Kenjiro felt something stir beneath the armor of his corporate life. Wonder. As she handed him the napkin covered in notes, her mother called, "Hana, don't bother the customer too much." But Kenjiro shook his head. "She's not bothering me," he said firmly. "She's saving me." The words hung in the air. Hana bit her lip, unsure whether to smile or hide. She chose to smile. And so, in that little Union Square diner, with snow thickening outside and only a few weary patrons left, a 9-year-old girl corrected clauses in 4 languages and revealed traps worth millions. Each correction was written not on polished contracts, but on fragile diner napkins, stained with coffee rings. When she slid the last napkin toward him, she whispered, "Words can be dangerous. They can trick people, but if you pay attention, they tell the truth." Kenjiro closed his laptop slowly. His heart, so long dulled by profit margins and boardroom battles, beat with a different rhythm. He looked at Hana Parker and realized he had stumbled not just upon a child with talent, but upon a gift. A reminder that brilliance does not ask for permission before it shows itself. Outside, the snow piled higher. Inside, a fragile alliance was sealed at a small table, with nothing more than napkins, pencils, and the courage of a little girl who refused to let words lie. The next evening, Kenjiro Sato stepped out of his chauffeured car in Brooklyn, his polished shoes sinking into slush. He had not intended to follow, but curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, pushed him here. He wanted to understand who this child was, this girl who read languages as though she had been born into them. Hana had left the diner in a rush, tugging her little brother's mittened hand as her mother closed up late. Kenjiro had watched from a distance, unsure if he was trespassing on something sacred, but compelled nonetheless. The Parkers lived in a crumbling housing project that leaned against the night like an old man with bad knees, and the stairwell smelled of damp concrete and forgotten paint. Bulbs flickered overhead. Kenjiro climbed the stairs slowly, following the faint sound of Hana's laughter echoing up the stairwell, a rare, fragile thing. Through the half-open door of their apartment, he saw her. Not the polished prodigy who had corrected his contracts, but a child balancing too much on her small frame. The living room was barely large enough for a couch and a folding table. The wallpaper peeled, exposing gray plaster. Yet Hana moved with practiced certainty. She lifted her 5-year-old brother Ethan onto a chair and set a cracked bowl of soup in front of him. The broth was thin, more water than flavor, but she coaxed him gently. "Eat slowly, Ethan. Warm food is good for your belly." Her mother, still in her diner uniform, sat slumped against the wall, a damp cloth on her forehead. She tried to rise when Hana set another bowl on the floor beside her, but her body betrayed her. "Mom, please," Hana whispered, her voice firm yet tender. "Rest. I'll take care of it." Kenjiro remained in the shadowed hallway, unseen, watching. Each movement of Hana's small hands carried the authority of someone far older. She stirred the soup, tucked a blanket around her brother, and then, as though the day hadn't already demanded enough of her, she pulled out a flashlight. She opened a notebook, its pages filled with careful writing in different languages. Spanish verbs on one page, German compound words on the next, even Japanese hiragana scrawled with tiny notes. She studied while her mother dozed and her brother ate, her lips moving silently, tracing characters with her finger. Her flashlight beam wavered, and Kenjiro realized with a pang that the apartment's overhead light had burned out. They had no replacement bulb, something heavy pressed against his chest. He had lost his own daughter years ago, a girl Hana's age when illness took her. He remembered her hands, how they once tugged at his sleeve, her voice asking him to come home early from meetings. He had not. And now, staring at Hana's hunched shoulders, he felt the wound of that absence all over again. Ethan coughed, and Hana immediately set aside her notebook, rubbing his back with gentle circles. "It's okay. Just little sips. You're strong." She offered him a piece of bread so small it was more crumb than slice, but Ethan smiled and nibbled anyway. Kenjiro closed his eyes. This was not how children should live. A girl of 9 should not be mother, sister, caretaker, translator, all at once. Yet Hannah bore it without complaint, as if this role had been carved into her bones. He could not remain in the shadows any longer. He knocked softly. The door opened only a crack, Hannah peering out. When she saw him, her eyes widened. "Mr. Sato?" Kenjiro inclined his head, unsure how to explain himself. "I wanted to return something." He held up a napkin covered with her handwriting, the translations she had scribbled. She blinked, uncertain. "But you already thanked me." "Yes," he said gently, "but I did not thank you enough." Her mother stirred, confusion flickering across her tired face. "Hannah, who's there?" Hannah opened the door wider and Kenjiro stepped inside. The room seemed even smaller with his tall frame filling the doorway. He bowed politely to her mother. "Forgive me for intruding. I am Kenjiro Sato." Recognition flickered. Her mother had seen his name on business news in passing, though she had no reason to imagine him standing in her living room. She tried to rise, but he raised a hand. "Please, rest." He turned to Hannah. "I wanted to see where such strength comes from." The words startled her. She looked away, embarrassed. "It's just home." Kenjiro walked closer to Ethan, kneeling so his eyes met the boy's. "And you must be the brother." Ethan nodded shyly, clutching his spoon. Kenjiro smiled faintly, then looked back at Hannah. "You do more here than most adults I know. You carry this house." Her lips trembled, caught between pride and denial. "Somebody has to." The sentence pierced him. He had built a company to carry empires, fleets across oceans, contracts spanning nations. And yet, the truest strength he had seen lately was a child holding her family together in a Brooklyn apartment. He sat on the edge of the worn couch, folding his hands. "Do you know what you did for me last night?" "You saved my company from losing millions." Hannah shook her head quickly. "I didn't save anyone. I just read." Kenjiro leaned forward, voice low, almost reverent. "No, you saw what no one else saw. And tonight, I see you. Truly see you." Silence filled the room, heavy with meaning. Her mother's eyes glistened, though she said nothing. At last, Hannah whispered, "But it doesn't change anything. Tomorrow, I still have to cook and study and—" She trailed off, voice breaking. Kenjiro felt his throat tighten. Here was the truth of it. Genius trapped not by ignorance, but by circumstance. He rose slowly, offering a slight bow once again. "Then tomorrow, I will come again. And perhaps we can begin to change something. Together." Hannah stared at him, unsure if promises from powerful men could be trusted. But for the first time in a long while, hope flickered behind her tired eyes. As Kenjiro stepped back into the cold Brooklyn night, snow crunching underfoot, he carried with him not just contracts and obligations, but the image of a child shouldering the world with grace. And in that image, he found both his own grief and a chance, maybe the last one, to heal. The lobby of Sato Global's Midtown Manhattan headquarters gleamed like an altar to power. Floor-to-ceiling glass framed the city's skyline, polished marble reflected the winter light, and a massive chrome sculpture twisted toward the ceiling as though to remind everyone entering that ambition had no limit. For 9-year-old Hannah Parker, standing in that cavernous lobby felt like stepping into another world, one that belonged to people with suits, badges, and polished shoes, not to a little girl in a faded sweater whose mother served coffee to strangers. She clutched a plain envelope in her small hands. Inside was money. Too much. Kenjiro had slipped it under her notebook after their last meeting. A thank you, he had said. But gratitude didn't look like this. Gratitude wasn't a heavy envelope of cash that made her feel like she had sold something she hadn't meant to sell. She had walked all the way from Brooklyn on the subway, Ethan's mittened hand warm in hers, the envelope pressed close against her chest. She told him it was an adventure, a trip to the tall glass building where the man with the laptop worked. He skipped beside her, thrilled, while she rehearsed in her head, I can't take this. I only did what I thought was right. The lobby's security guard spotted her before she reached the desk. He frowned, towering over her. Kid, this isn't a playground. Where's your parent? Hana swallowed, holding out the envelope with trembling fingers. I have to give this back to Mr. Sato. The guard snorted. Mr. Sato doesn't take walk-ins, sweetheart. And definitely not from... He trailed off, eyes narrowing. What's in that envelope? Money, Hana blurted, then regretted it instantly. The guard stiffened, suspicion flashing across his face. All right, that's enough. You can't come in here waving around money like it's candy. Step outside. Hana's cheeks burned. She tried again. Please, it's his. I don't want it. But the guard's hand hovered near his radio. Out. Now. Before I call someone. Ethan clung to her side, his small voice whispering, Hana, let's go home. She felt tears sting her eyes. She had only wanted to return what wasn't hers. Why did honesty always feel so hard? And then, just as the guard took a step toward them, a voice cut through the lobby like a blade. Calm, firm, unmistakable. Stop! Every head turned. The elevator doors had opened, and Kenjiro Sato stepped out, his charcoal suit immaculate, his presence commanding without effort. Conversations halted, phones lowered. Even the lobby's perpetual hum seemed to pause. He saw Hana first, the envelope in her hands, the guard looming above her, Ethan shrinking behind her legs. And something shifted in his expression. Kenjiro walked swiftly across the marble floor. The guard straightened, suddenly nervous. Mr. Sato, I was just... Kenjiro raised a hand. Enough! His voice carried the weight of someone used to command, but his gaze was gentle as it turned to Hana. She thrust the envelope toward him, her voice trembling but resolute. I can't keep this. It's too much. I only helped because words were wrong, that's all. Kenjiro took the envelope, his hands surprisingly careful, as though receiving something far more precious than cash. He looked at her with quiet admiration. You are braver than most people I know, to walk into this place and tell me no. The employees scattered around the lobby exchanged whispers. A child? A waitress's daughter? Standing before the CEO himself? Kenjiro turned, addressing them all. His voice rose, echoing against the glass walls. This girl, he said, gesturing to Hana, saved this company from losing $5 million. None of you knew it. Not the lawyers, not the directors, but she did. A 9-year-old with nothing but honesty and a pencil saw what we missed. A hush fell. Eyes widened. Some were skeptical, others astonished, but all were riveted. Hana felt her face burn, not with shame, but with something new. Recognition. For once, she was not invisible. Kenjiro bowed slightly, the gesture of his culture offered not to a board member or foreign dignitary, but to a child. Arigatou, Hana. The moment hung in the air, fragile and unforgettable. The distance between skyscraper glass and Brooklyn stairwells seemed to shrink, if only for a heartbeat. The guard shifted uncomfortably, his earlier harshness now exposed. Hana glanced at him but said nothing. Forgiveness, she thought, sometimes weighed less than anger. Kenjiro looked back at Hana. "Will you come upstairs? There is more work to do, and I cannot think of anyone better to help." She hesitated, clutching Ethan's hand. "But I'm just... me." Kenjiro smiled faintly. "Sometimes, just you is exactly what the world needs." And so, hand in hand with her brother, Hana stepped across the marble lobby, past the guard, past the whispers, into the elevators that rose toward the sky. For the first time, the glass doors of power opened not for lawyers or bankers, but for a little girl who believed words should never be allowed to lie. The 15th floor of Sato Global was not meant for children. Its walls were lined with glass partitions, its tables polished until they gleamed, and its shelves stacked with dictionaries, glossaries, and legal texts in more languages than most people could name. The translation room, so employees called it, was a sanctum where contracts were dissected, clauses debated, and every comma weighed against millions of dollars. Now, into that sanctum walked a girl of 9 with a backpack slung over her shoulder and her little brother skipping at her side. Hana Parker looked far too small for the cavernous room, yet her presence seemed to hush even the most seasoned translators. Kenjiro Sato had made the arrangements himself. A small desk had been cleared in one corner near the window overlooking Bryant Park. A lamp was placed carefully, along with a stack of paper and pencils. Nothing grand, but to Hana, it felt like her own territory in a world where she had never belonged. She slid into the chair, her eyes darting nervously toward the cluster of professionals gathered around the long central table. Men and women in crisp suits, their laptops open, were bent over a contract printed in Korean. Their voices overlapped, low, tense, uncertain. Kenjiro stood at the head of the table. "We are here because time is running out. This contract concerns the shipment stalled in Busan Harbor. If we misinterpret even one phrase, the goods will sit, and we will bleed money by the hour." He gestured to the group. "Begin." One translator adjusted his glasses. "The clause uses the word bokanryo, storage fee, straightforward." Another shook her head. "But the modifier suggests rimshi bokanryo, temporary custody charges. That's different." "Not different enough," muttered a third. "The port will read it as long-term fees regardless." The debate spiraled. Terms clashed, voices rose, each insisting on nuance. Hana listened, her fingers tightening around her pencil. She couldn't understand everything. They spoke too quickly, but she caught the rhythm, the shapes of the words. Her heart beat faster. Something was wrong. She had seen that word before, in the margins of an old Korean children's book from the library. She swallowed hard, then whispered to herself, "Not storage, not custody." Kenjiro's eyes caught hers from across the room. He tilted his head. Silent invitation. Hana rose from her small desk, her sneakers squeaking against the floor. The translators fell silent, frowns deepening. What could a child possibly add here? She approached the table, eyes scanning the contract. She pointed at the disputed word. "It doesn't mean just storage. It means detention fee, like when goods are kept beyond agreed time, not just stored." The room blinked. One translator frowned. "Impossible. That's too narrow an interpretation." Hana bit her lip, then explained in the simplest terms she could. "When my mom is late to pick me up at daycare, they don't call it a storage fee. They call it a late fee. This word is like that. Not for holding things normally, but for when someone delays." A murmur rippled across the table. It was a child's metaphor, but it made piercing sense. Kenjiro's gaze sharpened. "Continue." Hana traced the next line with her pencil. "And here, where it says Zaiko Horyu, it doesn't mean inventory pause. It means withheld inventory. That's not neutral. It's blame. It means they'll hold you responsible, even if the port caused the delay. The translators shifted uncomfortably. One woman pulled out her own dictionary, flipping pages quickly. Her face paled. She's right. Another cross-referenced online. Confirmed. Detention fee and withheld inventory. We mistranslated. A heavy silence fell. Then Kenjiro spoke, his tone even but firm. And had we signed it their way? The lead translator swallowed. We would have paid, indefinitely, millions lost. The cargo would have remained trapped. Kenjiro turned to Hana, bowing slightly. You have freed it. Arigato. Gasps stirred around the room. A child, correcting them. The humiliation was sharp, but undeniable. One man scoffed bitterly. She's 9 years old. We cannot build a corporation on napkins and metaphors from daycare. Kenjiro's eyes flashed, his voice slicing clean through the doubt. No. But we cannot ignore truth simply because it comes from a smaller voice. Hana shrank a little under the attention, but her brother Ethan, sitting proudly by her little desk, clapped his hands. My sister's smart, he chirped. The tension cracked into awkward laughter. Kenjiro looked at Hana again, softer now. How did you know? She hesitated, then lifted her backpack. From it, she pulled a battered Korean picture book with a faded cover. This word was in here. I didn't know all the meanings, so I looked it up at the library. She placed the book on the table, small and humble. Yet in that moment it carried more authority than any legal tome. The translators stared, chastened. For all their degrees and salaries, they had missed what a little girl from Brooklyn had found in the corner of a library. Kenjiro closed the contract firmly. Then it is settled. We correct the clause, and we release the cargo. He turned to Hana, his voice carrying not just authority but pride. Today, the Busan harbor opens not because of lawyers, but because of Hana Parker. The room erupted in subdued applause, some reluctant, some genuine. Hana's cheeks flushed crimson, but her eyes sparkled with a light that could not be dimmed. Back at her small desk, Ethan leaned against her shoulder. You're like a superhero, he whispered. Hana smiled shyly, but inside she wondered if maybe, just maybe, the world was starting to see her the way she always hoped it would. The city glowed beneath a veil of winter night. From the 15th floor of Sato Global, the view of Bryant Park stretched like a quilt of light and shadow, its trees strung with small lamps, its skating rink alive with laughter. But inside the glass walls, the office was quiet, holding only the hum of heating vents and the steady tick of the wall clock. Hana sat at her little desk near the window, her legs swinging just above the floor. Papers lay scattered before her, a mixture of homework and company documents. She had translated clauses with the same precision she used to solve fractions, but now her pencil lay idle. Her gaze lingered on the window, on the world outside that seemed both close and unreachable. Kenjiro Sato leaned against the edge of his desk, watching her. For weeks he had tried to understand this child, this paradox of fragility and strength. Tonight, with the office emptied, he decided to ask what had been circling his thoughts since the day in the diner. Hana, he said softly, where did you learn to read like this? To see things even trained men cannot? She shrugged, not looking up. Books, mostly old ones from the library. Sometimes videos. Sometimes I just guess, and then check. He smiled faintly. Guessing does not win contracts worth millions. Her lips curved just a little, but then her expression grew serious, and her eyes, so much older than 9, met his. When life doesn't translate for you, you have to learn how to translate it yourself. The words struck him like a blade sliding past armor. For a moment he forgot the polished office around them, forgot the skyline, forgot even the empire he commanded. All he saw was the truth in her eyes. She had grown up in a world where no one explained, no one simplified, no one protected. So she had learned to decode it alone. Kenjiro's throat tightened. He remembered his own daughter's voice, Aya, her small hands tugging at his sleeve, asking him to come home early from the office. He had promised. But work had come first, and then illness had stolen her before he kept his word. No translation could undo that silence. A buzz from Hana's backpack broke the moment. She rummaged quickly and pulled out a cheap cell phone, cracked at one corner. Her eyes widened. "It's from the daycare." Kenjiro straightened. "What is it?" She pressed the phone to her ear, listening, then her face drained of color. "It's Ethan. He has a fever. They're scared it's bad." Before the words fully left her lips, Kenjiro had already grabbed his coat. "Come. We'll go now." They rushed through the lobby, Hana's small hand gripping his sleeve as though he were the only anchor she had. Outside, the storm bit at their faces, snow swirling in punishing gusts. His driver pulled up, and within moments they were racing across Manhattan toward the daycare. When they arrived, Ethan sat curled on a couch, cheeks flushed red, small body trembling under a thin blanket. A young caregiver knelt beside him, worry etched into her face. Hana dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around her brother. "I'm here, Ethan. I'm here." Kenjiro crouched, his heart twisting. Without hesitation, he lifted the boy into his arms. Ethan's head rested against his shoulder, hot with fever, too light for his age. Kenjiro adjusted his grip with the instinct of someone who had once carried a child like this, long ago, across Tokyo nights when Aya's fever had frightened him. He glanced at Hana. Her eyes shone with fear, but also with something else. Trust. At the hospital, fluorescent lights glared coldly overhead, nurses rushing back and forth. Kenjiro carried Ethan past the automatic doors as Hana clung to his side. Doctors took the boy quickly, checking vitals, inserting a thermometer, whispering words that made Hana's knuckles whiten. Kenjiro bent down to her level. "He will be okay," he said gently. "You did the right thing, bringing him here fast." Her voice cracked. "But what if I lose him too?" The rawness of her words sliced through him. He reached for her hand, his own steady despite the storm inside. "Hana," he whispered, "I once lost someone too. My daughter. She was about your age. I thought I would never feel her weight in my arms again. But tonight, carrying Ethan, it felt like carrying her. It felt like I had been given a second chance." Tears welled in Hana's eyes. You lost your daughter?" He nodded slowly, his voice breaking for the first time. "Yes, Aya. She was 9, like you. And every day since, I have wished I could protect her one more time." Hana's small hand tightened around his. Maybe you're protecting us now, so Aya won't feel alone." The simplicity of her words undid him. He closed his eyes, letting the weight of grief and healing mingle in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt something shift, like a locked door inside him creaking open. A nurse returned, smiling gently. "It's just a viral fever. He'll need rest and fluids, but he's stable." Relief washed over Hana so strongly she nearly collapsed. She leaned against Kenjiro, her head resting against his coat sleeve. For once, she allowed herself to be a child, leaning on someone else instead of carrying the weight alone. Kenjiro placed a hand on her shoulder. Not as a CEO, not as a benefactor, but as a father in spirit. "From now on," he said quietly, "you will not translate life alone." And in that cold hospital room overlooking Bryant Park's winter lights, the bond of father and daughter, born not of blood but of need, loss, and love, took its first true breath. The 15th floor no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a stage. Hannah Parker, 9 years old, sat at her small desk near the window, tracing Japanese katakana characters from one of her library books during a break. She had grown accustomed to the steady hum of keyboards, the tapping of pens, and the low voices of translators debating across the long table. But lately, another sound had begun to weave itself into the air, one sharper, cutting through her concentration like shards of glass. Whispers. At first, she tried to ignore them, but the words seemed to float toward her, sticky and cruel. "The waitress's kid. Kenjiro's little charity project. She probably doesn't even understand half of what she writes." They didn't say it to her face. They didn't have to. The smirks when she walked past, the way papers were shuffled a little too loudly when she sat down, the dismissive chuckles whenever her name was mentioned, it was enough. One afternoon, after correcting a small clause in a Portuguese contract, Hannah gathered her things to leave. She passed by the glass corridor outside the translation room, and that's when she heard it, clear, unmistakable. "She's just a child. Kenjiro's blinded by grief over his daughter. That girl's nothing but a replacement doll." The words struck her chest like a blow. She froze, unable to move. Replacement. Doll. Her pencil slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. She bent to pick it up, but her vision blurred. By the time she reached the restroom at the far end of the hall, tears were already spilling down her cheeks. Inside the cold, tiled silence, she locked herself in a stall and pressed both hands to her face. She wanted to be strong. She had been strong for Ethan, for her mother, for herself, but the cruel whispers had found the cracks in her armor. Her breath hitched. What if they're right? What if I'm not really talented, just pitied? What if Mr. Sato only sees me because of his daughter? The stall seemed too small to hold her despair. She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her backpack, the last page of her math notebook. And there, in shaky pencil strokes, she began to write. Not contracts, not clauses, something else, a plan. She drew boxes and arrows, writing words in English, Spanish, German, Japanese, Romaji, and even the little Korean she knew. At the top, she scribbled a title in block letters, almost too large for the page. Global Multilingual Integration System. Her handwriting was childish, uneven, but the logic was sharp, astonishingly clear. She sketched how a company could build one unified platform where every contract in every language could be cross-checked automatically. She mapped out categories: shipping, logistics, legal liability, then arrows linking synonyms, examples, danger words like gross volume storage and detention fee. Her tears slowed as the page filled. This was her language, not whispers, not insults, systems, connections, puzzles that couldn't be broken by cruelty. She whispered to herself as her pencil scratched, "If they don't believe me, I'll build something they can't ignore." Minutes passed, then an hour. She didn't hear the door open. Kenjiro Sato stood at the threshold, concern tightening his brow. He had been searching for her after noticing her desk abandoned. An employee had muttered something dismissive. The little waitress's kid must have gone home early. And suspicion had gripped his chest. Now he saw the small figure in the last stall, the faint sound of pencil on paper. He stepped closer, careful not to startle her. "Hannah?" She gasped, quickly pulling the page to her chest. I wasn't doing anything wrong." Kenjiro crouched beside her, lowering his voice. I never thought you were. But why are you here alone when you should be in class with the others? Her eyes brimmed again, and for a moment she wanted to lie, to say she was just tired, but the dam had already cracked. They call me names, she whispered. They say I'm only here because of you, that I'm just your replacement doll. The words hung heavy in the cold air. Kenjiro's heart twisted. He had known envy existed in his ranks, but to hear it poison a child, it burned like acid. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Listen to me, Hana. Do not let other people translate your worth. Only you can do that. She shook her head, voice trembling. But what if they're right? What if you only keep me here because of Aya? The name fell between them like a stone into deep water. Aya, his daughter. Kenjiro's eyes closed briefly. Then he opened them, steady, resolute. I see Aya in you, yes, but not because you are her, because you remind me of her courage. But Hana, what you have, your mind, your honesty, those are yours alone. No one else's. Hana clutched the page tighter, uncertain. Slowly she held it out. Then, will you tell me if this is worthless too? Kenjiro took the paper, reading the scribbles. To anyone else it might have looked like nonsense, a child's messy diagram. But as his eyes scanned, his breath caught. The structure, the foresight, the connections across languages and legal terms, rough but visionary. This, he whispered, is not worthless. This is genius. Her lips parted, hope flickering. Really? He nodded firmly. Really. This is more than many adults would dare attempt. You have built the bones of something extraordinary. For the first time that day, Hana's shoulders eased. A fragile smile tugged at her mouth. Kenjiro folded the paper carefully, as though it were a contract worth billions. We will not let whispers decide your place, Hana. Let them speak. One day, they will have to admit the truth, that the Waitress kid saw further than they ever could. She leaned into him then, just for a moment, letting herself rest against the steady strength of his presence. And as the city lights shimmered through the frosted bathroom window, Hana realized something important. Words could wound, but words could also build. And hers had just begun. Morning sunlight spilled through the 15th floor windows of Sato Global, softening the sharp lines of Manhattan's skyline. The translation room, usually buzzing with tension, was unusually quiet. Papers had been stacked neatly. The long conference table was empty. Only Hana Parker sat at her corner desk, flipping through one of her library books, her pencil hovering over the margins as she scribbled translations like secret notes to herself. Her eyes were puffy from the night before. She had cried herself to sleep, Ethan curled beside her, their mother's soft breathing filling the small Brooklyn apartment. Yet now, in the hush of morning, she tried to pretend nothing had cracked. She was back at her desk, doing what she always did, studying words no one asked her to study. The door opened with a quiet click. Hana looked up, startled. Kenjiro Sato stepped inside, carrying a slim folder in one hand and something small in the other. He didn't stride like the CEO he was. His movements were measured, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Hana, he said, his voice low but carrying across the glass room. She set down her pencil. Yes, Mr. Sato? He approached, placing the folder on the central table. I reviewed your notes, the system you drew, the Global Multilingual Integration System. I studied it last night. Her cheeks flushed. She wanted to hide the crumpled paper back in her notebook. It was just doodles, just me being silly. Kenjiro shook his head. No, it was clarity. It was vision. And vision deserves to be named. He opened the folder. Inside was a crisp sheet of paper stamped with the company's seal. Beside it, a small stack of business cards. He held one out to her. Hana blinked. Her hands trembled as she took it. The card was heavier than she expected. The letters embossed in dark blue. Hana Parker, Jr., Director of Language Integration. Her breath caught. Director? The word sounded impossible in her mouth, like a foreign term she hadn't studied yet. Kenjiro bowed slightly, the gesture of his homeland. Hi, Director, because you built something worth leading. Her throat tightened. But I'm only 9. I'm just a waitress kid. The words tumbled out before she could stop them, echoing the whispers that had cut her so deeply. Her chest burned with shame. Kenjiro's gaze did not waver. He placed both hands at his sides, then bowed deeply, so deeply that even the sunlight seemed to pause at the gesture. When I bow to you, Hana, he said in Romaji, his accent careful, reverent, I say arigato, not because of pity, because of respect. She stared at him, wide-eyed. Never had anyone, let alone a man of his power, bowed to her. But I don't deserve this, she whispered. What if people laugh? What if they say I don't belong? Kenjiro straightened, his expression solemn but kind. People always laugh at truth before they accept it. Let them. What matters is that you see what others cannot. That is the essence of leadership. Hana clutched the card to her chest. It wasn't just paper. It was recognition. Proof that she was more than whispers, more than poverty, more than a child holding her family together. Tears stung her eyes. I didn't ask for this, she said softly. No, Kenjiro replied. That is why you deserve it. The ones who chase titles rarely honor them, but the ones who doubt, who hesitate, who only wish to serve, those are the leaders who change the world. Silence filled the room. Hana's heart pounded, caught between disbelief and a fragile bloom of hope. Ethan burst through the door at that moment, carrying a paper airplane he had folded from scrap copy paper. Hana! Look, it flies! He tossed it high, and the little plane spiraled across the translation room, landing squarely on the polished conference table. Kenjiro smiled faintly. Even paper can fly if folded with care. Why not a title, if carried with honor? Hana laughed, the sound breaking through the heaviness in her chest. She looked down at the business card again, then slipped it carefully into her notebook, between the pages of her doodles. It felt safe there, pressed close to the system she had imagined. She glanced at Kenjiro, her voice quiet but steady. If I accept this, will you promise me something? Anything, he said. Don't ever let it be just a name. If I'm junior director, then I want to work, really work, not just stand next to you like a doll. Kenjiro's eyes softened. Then you will work, harder than most perhaps, but with joy, because you love the truth inside words. For the first time, Hana nodded without fear. Then I accept. The door opened again, and a few early translators entered, murmuring their greetings to Kenjiro. Their eyes widened when they saw Hana standing at the head of the table, her small figure illuminated by sunlight. A notebook clutched to her chest. Kenjiro's voice rang clear. Good morning. Today we begin a new chapter at Sato Global. And at the center of it is this young director, Hana Parker. Gasps. Whispers. Stairs. But Hana lifted her chin, holding the card like a shield. For once, the whispers didn't matter. She had been named, not by rumor, but by truth. And in that moment, she understood something powerful. Names could wound, but they could also heal. And now, for the first time in her life, her name carried weight not of pity, but of respect. The train slid into Boston under a sky heavy with winter. Snow had been falling all morning, blanketing the harbor in a silence broken only by the distant cries of gulls and the slow churn of water against the piers. Boston Harbor, once the heart of rebellion, now stood quiet, its ships swaying in rhythm with the tide, their masts lined with frost. Kenjiro Sato had brought Hana and Ethan here on a rare weekend trip. It was not business that drew him, but something harder to name. A desire to show them a world beyond the cracked stairwell in Brooklyn or the glass walls of Midtown Manhattan. He wanted them to feel the breadth of life, to taste freedom in the salt air. Hana walked between him and Ethan, her small boots crunching against the snow-packed boards of the wharf. Her cheeks glowed red beneath her wool hat, and her eyes darted to the ships, the ropes, the men hauling nets onto the docks. She drank in every detail with the hunger of a child who had always lived in shadows. "Smells like the ocean's cooking," Ethan giggled, tugging at his sister's mitten. Hana laughed, but her gaze lingered on Kenjiro. He was quieter than usual, his eyes following the water as though it spoke a language only he could hear. They stopped at the end of the pier, where the view opened wide to the Atlantic. Snowflakes melted on Kenjiro's coat. He stood with his hands folded behind his back, the wind tugging gently at his tie, his profile sharp against the white horizon. Hana hesitated, then stepped closer. "Mr. Sato?" "Yes, Hana?" She bit her lip. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of every lonely night in Brooklyn, every whispered insult, every page of foreign words she had taught herself just to make sense of life. Could you be our dad?" The question pierced the air sharper than the winter wind. Kenjiro turned, his breath caught in his chest. Ethan looked up too, blinking, as if realizing what Hana had just said. Kenjiro crouched down so he was level with them, the snow crunching under his knees. He searched Hana's face, those steady brown eyes that had saved his company, that had challenged his grief, that had asked only to be seen. "Hana," he said softly, "do you know what you are asking me?" She nodded, fiercely now. "Yes. Not just to give us money or food. To stay. To listen. To be there when we need someone. I can take care of Ethan and Mom, but sometimes I want someone to take care of me too." Her voice cracked at the end, a thin thread in the cold. Kenjiro felt something unravel inside him. He had thought his heart had frozen with Aya's death, that fatherhood had been buried with her. But here was this child, not asking for gifts or titles, only for presence. Only for love. Ethan shuffled closer, tugging Kenjiro's sleeve. "I don't remember, Dad. But I think maybe you could be one. You carried me when I was sick." Kenjiro's vision blurred. He reached out, pulling both children into his arms, their small bodies pressed against the fabric of his coat. Snowflakes settled on Hana's hat, on Ethan's scarf, on his own shoulders, melting with the heat of their closeness. He whispered, "Yes, I will be your father. If you will have me." Hana's tears spilled freely now, though her smile shone brighter than any city light. She wrapped her arms tight around his neck, her voice muffled against his coat. "Then we have a dad." Ethan giggled through his tears. "Can we call you Dad now?" Kenjiro's chest shook with a laugh that was half sobs, half relief. "Yes. Call me Dad. Call me whatever makes you feel safe. The harbor around them seemed to blur, the snow falling heavier, wrapping them in a cocoon of silence. A Japanese phrase slipped from his lips, unbidden, trembling but full of reverence. Okasan no tami ni mamoretai. For your mother, too, I will protect. Hana pulled back slightly, eyes wide. What did that mean? He smiled faintly. It means family is not just children. It means I will do everything to help your mother, too. No one will be left behind. The three of them stood there, arms wrapped tight, while the ships rocked gently and the snow swallowed the world in white. Passers-by glanced, pausing at the sight of a powerful man kneeling in the snow, embracing two children with tears running down his face. Some shook their heads in wonder, others simply smiled. Kenjiro no longer cared who saw. For the first time since Aya's death, he felt whole again. Not because grief had vanished, but because love had returned in a new form. They walked back toward the city as the snow deepened, leaving behind 3 sets of footprints across the pier. Small prints and large, side by side, weaving forward into a path none of them had traveled before. The Pacific stretched wide and endless, its waves rolling toward Alki Beach in Seattle with the slow rhythm of eternity. The evening sun dipped low, painting the horizon in hues of orange and violet, and the sea breeze carried the scent of salt and pine. For the first time in years, Kenjiro Sato felt the weight on his chest lift with every breath. This was not a boardroom, not a harbor, not a glass tower in Manhattan. It was a shoreline, humble and open, where footprints could be washed away and begun again. And tonight, that was exactly what they were here to do. A small circle had gathered on the sand, just a handful of people. Hana Parker stood in the center, her hand clutching Ethan's, both of them dressed in simple sweaters and coats. Their mother, frail but smiling, sat on a folding chair nearby, wrapped in a shawl. And before them all, Kenjiro stood not as a CEO, not as a man bound to contracts, but as a father about to claim his family. The official from King County Family Services cleared her throat, holding a clipboard. We are here to finalize the guardianship of Hana Parker and Ethan Parker under Mr. Kenjiro Sato. Her voice carried a calm solemnity, but even she smiled at the sight of the 2 children bouncing on their toes, too excited to remain still. Kenjiro knelt down in the sand so he was eye level with them. The cold grains clung to his trousers, but he didn't care. He held out his hands, palms open. Hana, Ethan, today we are not just promising with words. Today we make it official. I will be your father, not for a moment, not for a season, but for always. Hana's eyes brimmed with tears. Even when I mess up? Kenjiro's lips curved gently. Especially then. Ethan's voice piped up. Even if I spill soup on your fancy suit? Kenjiro laughed, the sound ringing out like bells against the waves. Even then. The official handed him a pen, the papers clipped neatly to her board. Kenjiro signed with steady strokes, his name etched in dark ink across the page. It was the simplest contract he had ever entered, and the most important. He turned the clipboard to Hana. Would you like to sign too? Her hands trembled as she scrawled her name in uneven letters. Ethan followed, his blocky handwriting sprawling across the line. Together, their marks sealed the covenant. The official nodded. It is done. Congratulations, Mr. Sato. You are now their legal father. For a moment, silence fell except for the ocean's steady song. Then Hana dropped the pen, flinging her arms around Kenjiro's neck. Dad, she whispered, the word breaking free like a bird released from its cage. Ethan piled in next, his small arms squeezing tightly. We have a dad. Kenjiro's vision blurred. He pulled them close, his heart surging with a joy so fierce it frightened him. He whispered, almost a prayer, "Arigato, you have given me life again." The sun slipped lower, casting their shadows long across the sand. Their mother dabbed her eyes with the edge of her shawl, her smile trembling but radiant. She whispered to herself, "They are safe now." After the official departed, leaving them in the quiet of the beach, the three of them lingered. They walked along the shoreline, hand in hand, leaving prints that the tide reached for but never quite claimed. Hana looked up at Kenjiro. Do we have a home now?" He squeezed her hand. "Yes. A home by the sea, where waves will always remind us that life is movement, but love stays." Ethan giggled. "Can we get a dog?" Kenjiro chuckled. "We can talk about that." They paused, watching the sky bleed into dusk. Hana crouched to draw a heart in the sand with her finger, then wrote inside it with careful letters. Family. She stepped back, embarrassed. "It'll wash away soon." Kenjiro shook his head. "Maybe the waves will take it, but the sea remembers, and so do we." He bent down, pressed his palm over hers in the sand, leaving the imprint of father and daughter side by side. Ethan joined too, and the three prints overlapped into one. The breeze carried Hana's quiet words. "It doesn't need translating, does it? Family is the same in every language." Kenjiro's chest ached with pride. "Yes, Hana. Family is the one word the world cannot twist." As the sky deepened to indigo and the first stars appeared, the three of them stood together, their silhouettes etched against the ocean's glow. No contracts, no whispers, no wealth could measure what had been given and received. Just love, pure and simple. And so, on a Seattle beach at sunset, a new family was born. Out of loss, out of courage, out of the brilliance of a little girl who once scribbled translations on diner napkins. Their footsteps stretched forward across the sand, small and large, weaving side by side into tomorrow. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of Hana's story. May her courage, kindness, and the healing of a new family remind us all that love is the only language everyone understands. If this touched your heart, please consider subscribing so we can keep sharing stories of hope and light.